Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and that you're following the 3 H's of the channel. In this video, it's all about encounters from Australia. So as always, pull up a stump with me and let's get into it. Thank you for watching. So I have a couple stories from Australia. This first one, we were camping on a 400-acre property. There's a very large house on this property, which is legitimately haunted, but we'll talk about that later. I was camping on a riverbank, about 200 meters from the house. There was two guys that I was camping with. They go up to the house to shower or something, I don't remember. So I walk out 50 meters from the camp. The long and short of the reason why is that I really had to poop. So while I'm doing my business, I distinctly see someone grab a beer from our esky. I think, oh, my friends must have come back early. I go over after finishing my business. There's no one there. Later on, I ask them if they came down at all to get beers. They say, "What are you talking about? We've been at the house for a while." I never did work out what happened, and I didn't have any way of counting the beers to see if someone had actually taken one, because we had 5 slabs in there, and we had been drinking heavily over the last 2 days and nights. So, who the hell was the person? But anyway, the house stories. So, my first time on the property, it was about 7 at night during this experience. We were going into town to pick up some more beer. So my mate tells me to remember what light in the house is on. I thought he was just being weird, but I thought, alright, I'll remember. So we come back from town with some beer and 2 bottles of Stone's green ginger wine. And there's a different light on in the house. There's nobody else on the property except for us. Another one. It's 2 in the morning. We're all well and truly drunk. We decide to go up to the house for the lulls. There's no wind. Everything's very still. It's a cold winter's night. As soon as we get to the door, these massive winds come out of nowhere. I'm talking like 40 knots. We all WTF a little, but our liquid courage overcomes our better judgment, and we go inside. We're noping around the house a bit, trying to spook each other. We go into the bedroom. My friend decides to joke around by saying, "Is there anyone here?" But nothing. And then he says, "If there's anything here, give us a sign." In true paranormal TV show fashion, there's a massive bang from another room. It sounds like someone dropped 10 bricks onto the floor. We just nope our way down the stairs and out of the house as quick as we can. I was later told that the gardener or caretaker had had a heart attack whilst cleaning the pool there and drowned. I don't know why they didn't tell me before I went into the haunted mansion of death. But anyway, my last story from this property. We were camping at the peak of one of the nearby hills that are on this massive property. It's about a half-hour drive or maybe an hour's walk to get there. It's a false peak with a much larger mountain behind us. So we're just chilling out. We cut some firewood, down some drinks. The sun is beginning to set, and we start cooking our food. We can consistently hear things moving in the grasslands nearby. We tack to cool our way over with spotlights and mag lights, but we can't really find anything. We eventually all settle down and go to bed around 2 in the morning. We can hear things moving around as we're all trying to go to sleep. Later in the night, I hear these haunting sounds. They sound like the calls of no animal that I've ever heard before. Later, I've heard that they were similar to what, quote, experts call yowie calls. We wake up an hour before sunup. There's these weird blue lights all over the hill behind us. They were way too bright and large to be torches, and they were just darting about around the hill. I never worked out what those lights were, or what the calls were. I don't know how I feel about yowies, although I like to keep an open mind on the subject. Sorry if none of these are particularly scary, they're just weird events that happen to me. This story was sent in by Rachel. Now, Rachel had sent in a story before about an encounter in the Australian outback, so Rachel, once again, I hope I can do your story justice. The boy in the red shirt. The last story I shared to the channel was my most recent encounter with spirits. The story that I'm about to share was my first. At the time, I didn't know what I was dealing with. Now that I'm older, I know the truth of it. I was 4 when this happened, but I know what I experienced was out of the ordinary, and my memory of these events is as clear as if it happened only a few years ago. In 1999, my family and I moved into a rental property on the corner of 2 streets, only a 1-minute walk to Moffat Beach in Queensland, Australia. It was beautiful, and we would go to the beach every day to look at rock pools and occasionally watch skydivers landing on a long stretch of sand. I wasn't in school yet, and I often became lonely through the day, so I'd go and play in the backyard. We had a trampoline at the edge of the yard, which was next to a short wooden fence with open horizontal planks, which was easy for anyone to get through. One day, I was jumping on the trampoline when across the road stood a boy, a little older than me, wearing a red shirt with a faded cartoon print of a white and blue rocket ship. He just stood there, staring at me. I waved, and he did not wave back. He did, however, run off to his left up the road. The second time I saw him, I got off the trampoline and climbed through the gap in the fence. I stood at the edge of the road and called out to him. He replied with a sweet and simple hello. So me, being 4 years old and lonely, asked if he wanted to play. He delighted at the idea and beckoned me to cross the road. I told him that I couldn't do that, and I had to ask my dad to meet his parents first. His face turned strange, an expression I couldn't decipher, and said that I couldn't meet his parents, that they were no longer home. I asked him a bunch of questions about this and where he lived, but he avoided answering all of my questions. He just kept telling me to come play across the road. I said no. I told my dad about the little boy in the red shirt, asking if we could go find where he lived. My dad looked at me, confused, telling me that there were no other kids on this street. I was adamant that he wasn't imaginary. He was there, plain as day. My dad then said in a very annoyed and skeptical tone, "Don't cross the road to see him, no matter what." I saw this little boy a few more times after that, standing in the same spot, where the same questions would be repeated, and eventually we got frustrated with our disagreements. He ran off in the same direction as the first time we met, and I didn't see him for weeks. On a bright afternoon, my dad told me that skydivers would be landing today, and we could go watch them. Excitedly, I asked, when? He said a half an hour to an hour. Now, to a 4-year-old, this seems like an eternity for an exciting event. I was told to go play on the trampoline to make the time go by quicker. Well, when I went into the yard, there was the boy in the same spot across the road as each time before. I was thrilled that he wasn't upset with me anymore, and the first thing I did was tell him about the skydivers and that he should get him and his parents to meet us down at the beach. He looked at me confused and asked what a skydiver was. I told him about how men jump out of the planes with parachutes. He shouted, "What? Why? Is it because of the war?" I shook my head, not understanding why he would say that, and I replied to him, "No, for fun. There is no war." He looked like he was going to cry and simply said, "Oh." He then perked up and encouraged me to come down to the beach now so he could see them, and we could play in the sand for as long as we like. Already being so excited and impatient, I agreed. I told the boy I needed my shoes and I'll meet him down there. Remember, it was a corner house, so there was another road on the other side of the property. I'm not sure where my dad was in this moment, but I ran through the house onto the front patio, slipped on my little pink glitter sandals, and proceeded to dart across the road on the other side of the house. The next moment was a white loud blur. A car just happened to be driving down that road. It swerved to miss me and crashed into the neighbor's fence. The front of the car was busted up and a blown tire. The driver was screaming at me. My dad came rushing out, furious, saying that he told me to never cross the road. He picked me up and hauled me inside, whilst apologizing to the traumatized driver who nearly just killed a kid. All the while, I was crying and telling him the boy in the red shirt wanted to see the skydivers too. Of course, my dad did not believe me. I was punished by not being allowed to see the skydivers, and I spent the afternoon in my room, not allowed to play with any toys. I never saw the boy again. Now, many years later, I know what was really happening. I didn't realize at the time, but the boy always wore the same red shirt with the rocket ship. He wouldn't let me know where he lived, because he didn't actually live anywhere. That his parents had long moved on. There were definitely no other kids on that street, and that he wanted me to come play forever. So thank you to Rachel for sending in that story. I hope I could do it justice for you. Alright, so I've got a hell of a story. I'm not a very supernaturally inclined person, and I've always shied away from anything to do with ghosts, spirits, etc. But to this day, I can't really provide any rational explanation for this story. I hope you enjoy. It's all true. I'm not here to LARP. So we're camping on the eastern coast of Australia around Christmas a few years ago. We were in a shitty old four-wheel drive with my parents and my sister. It was getting towards the evening, and we'd been driving for a couple of hours, with a particular destination in mind to camp for the night. When we get to the turnoff for the national park where we were going to camp, we find that it's absolutely packed. The campground is like sardine level. I guess that's because we were in that Christmas New Year period where there's a lot of people out and about. Needless to say, we were going to need to find another place to sleep. We start to drive back along the dirt road toward the highway, a little disheartened, as we didn't know of any alternative spots to sleep nearby. We suddenly notice another road leading off the one that we were on. I can't remember if we noticed it on the way down, but we noticed it now. We still had probably an hour of light, so we decided to drive down it for a while and see if it led to anywhere that we could pitch a tent. It's pretty badly maintained, full of divots and shit, but the car seems to be handling it. We followed this road for a fair while before we end up in a little clearing beside the bank of this broad tidal river. It's really beautiful. There's no grass, so we decide to keep looking. We notice that there are several roads departing from the clearing. This is besides the one that we entered it by. We pick one and start to drive down it. Night is encroaching quite rapidly. I say that by this point, we had maybe 45 minutes of light left to find somewhere. We drive and drive through what seems like a maze of shitty dirt roads before we end up in this weird little car park. We seem to be at the top of some sort of hill, and a small walking track that began at the car park and led down into the forest. We decide to scout it out, hoping that we might get lucky. After about a minute or two on this track, suddenly we emerge from the trees and we are looking down into this absolutely picturesque camping spot. The ground where we were standing was sloped gently down to form this beautiful little gully, covered in short grass. It was really small, basically the perfect size for a couple of tents. To the left, a path between some rocky ridges that led directly to the beach, which can't have been more than 25 meters away. To the right, the crease of the valley continued, with the grass giving way to some low-lying trees and longer grasses. We were absolutely gobsmacked. Not 5 minutes ago, we were somewhat frantically trying to find somewhere to sleep, and suddenly, we find ourselves in what I would confidently call the most beautiful camping spot I have ever seen. However, something wasn't right. From the moment we came out of the tree line and first caught sight of the spot, something felt wrong. Like really wrong. This inexplicable, simmering dread had come over us all, and we all felt it. I'm not talking about feeling a bit scared. Our bodies, on a base instinctual level, were telling us to get the hell out of this place. As we descended to the base of the valley, we noticed a black crow sitting on a lower branch on one of the trees to the right side. It was just sitting there, motionless, staring at us. This may sound cheesy or creepy, but honestly, we weren't that shook by it, because Aussie crows do tend to stare. It wasn't out of the ordinary. We walked out onto the beach, and then back across the grass, and into the trees. We were having a bit of look around when we ended up finding this little pool of tepid water. We call it a billabong, with a huge shell midden beside it. For those who don't know, shell middens are piles of shells and other things created by Aboriginal people living in an area pre-colonization. Evidently, the Aboriginal people thought that this spot was just as nice as we did. We continued through the trees, and before the long valley ended at the bank of the same tidal river that we saw earlier, it's quite something to behold. We've managed to somewhat shake off our earlier fears, and we are feeling a little more lighthearted now, I guess is the best word. We start back toward the grass so that we can head back to the car to get our tents. The crow is still sitting on the branch. We're watching it for a few seconds, and then it just flops over dead. It falls backwards off the branch and into the long grass. We all just look at each other, obviously horrified. All of our earlier fears have returned. Despite these obvious warning signs, we are still set on camping here, so we go up to the car and get our stuff. We're pitching the tent, and Mom decides to go collect some wood for the fire. After a while, though, we notice that she hasn't come back to the camp. Obviously, we're already on edge, so we drop what we're doing to go look for her. She's not on the beach. We begin to walk back through the trees. We find her. Her eyes are totally transfixed on the surface of the pool of water. We call out to her, and it's like she snaps out of some hypnotic trance. Confusedly, she comes back to camp. We all get the camp set up. At this point, we're probably 20 minutes from nightfall. Dad and I go out to the beach just chatting about whatever. We look along the top of the ridge, which looks down onto the beach. There's a tall white figure standing along the top of the cliff, looking down on us. We both just stare at it, terrified, trying to convince ourselves that it's just a rock or a tree trunk or something rational to explain what we're seeing. It's definitely not human, whatever the hell it is. We go back to camp, having decided not to share what we've seen with the others. Everybody is really shook by this point. The simmering dread is becoming more and more pronounced. Me and Dad sit down and decide to try to unwind for a bit to get our mind off the situation. We were both pretty into Magic the Gathering at the time. We purchased a couple booster packs earlier that day. We decide to open them just to have a bit of fun. We opened probably 6 or 7 packs. We realized that without fail, the rare card in each pack had been a black rare, some sort of demon, or something relating to death. It's absolutely inexplicable. It gets dark. We decide that it'd be best to just try and sleep. We all get into bed, but we're all too terrified to sleep. After a while, we start to drift off despite our fear, except Dad, who decides there's no way that he's going to sleep, and that he may as well stay up and keep an eye on things in case he needs to protect us or something. He's sitting on a rock outside the tent. He sees something out of the corner of his eye. He turns quickly and finds himself face to face with a completely massive, all-white kangaroo just staring at him. Albino kangaroos are extremely rare. He tells me it was over 5 feet tall. I recall the tall white figure that we saw earlier, Suddenly, an immense feeling of dread overcomes him, and he decides it's time for us to get the F out of there. He wakes me up. I think the others were already awake. We pack up frantically and literally run out as quickly as we can. We get back to the car. It starts. Thank God. The time is 11:02 p.m. Dad claims that he hadn't slept at all, that he'd been sitting outside for no more than an hour after we all went to bed. Somehow, what he'd felt was an hour was actually 4 hours. We somehow managed to navigate our way out of the maze of dirt roads and get back onto the highway. Words cannot describe the weight that lifted when we drove out of that place. It honestly felt like that we just avoided death. We were all feeling kind of giddy, reeling from what had happened. We needed a place to sleep. Dad looks on his phone and finds an overnight spot nearby. We drive down the highway until we get to the turnoff. We follow the dirt road for a couple of minutes as it winds its way into the forest. We end up in this fairly run-of-the-mill camping spot. There's only a couple caravans around. We quickly pitch our tents and get into bed, feeling quite relieved, finally at peace. We hear a faint sound, barely perceivable. It slowly gets louder and louder, and then gets dramatically loud, and we're starting to freak out again. We think that maybe it's a plane passing by really low overhead. Just when the sound gets almost unbearably loud, it passes us and begins to recede into the distance. We're too exhausted to freak out. We all fall asleep. We all slept well. When we got up in the morning, the source of the previous night's sound became clearer. Though we had been on the road of a campsite for several minutes, it was essentially just following the highway, and the campsite, which we all thought was somewhere in the forest, actually bordered the road. The sound we heard was a big freight truck driving down the highway, passing within 25 meters of where we were camped. After what happened that night, we did a little bit of research and asked a few questions. Apparently, there were some genocides that happened within that national park. Could it be that that picturesque valley might have been the location of one of them? That the spirits of those dead still lingered? On top of that, my father spoke to a friend of his that worked closely with the Aboriginal people. The albino kangaroo is a powerful symbol in Aboriginal folklore. It's the guardian of the dead. So those encounters were pretty strange and scary, weren't they? If there was one that stuck out to you, let me know which one it was down in the comments. And if you would like to donate to the channel, or if you would like to send in a story, there's links in the description for that too. And with that, I think I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump. I hope you have a good weekend, a good week, and I'll see you Wednesday.